Hey everyone, have you ever felt stuck emotionally, unable to let go of someone or something that's no longer serving you? Maybe it was a toxic relationship, a dead-end job, or a limiting belief that's been holding you back. That feeling of being weighed down, of clinging to what's familiar, even when it's painful, it's a universal human struggle. But what if I told you that ancient wisdom could help you find freedom and resilience in the face of life's challenges? Enter Stoicism, the practical philosophy that has inspired everyone from emperors to entrepreneurs to everyday people seeking a better way to live. At the heart of Stoicism are a set of principles and practices for cultivating inner strength, clarity, and peace in a turbulent world. And no Stoic embodies these teachings more powerfully than Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who ruled the Roman Empire at the height of its power. Despite his privileged position, Marcus Aurelius faced enormous challenges and losses throughout his life, from the death of his children to the betrayal of friends to the constant threat of war. Yet through it all, he remained grounded in the Stoic virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. His private journals, compiled in the timeless classic Meditations, offer a window into his practical philosophy for thriving in the face of adversity. So what can we learn from Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics about emotional resilience and inner freedom? Over the next hour and a half, we'll explore 7 essential Stoic principles for letting go of what's holding you back and embracing your highest potential. First, we'll dive into the idea of impermanence, the ever-changing nature of reality that the Stoics saw as the key to liberation. By accepting that all things are temporary, we can learn to flow with life's ups and downs and find okayness amidst uncertainty. Next, we'll explore how to master our emotions through the power of rational thought. The Stoics understood that our feelings are often based on our judgments and interpretations, not objective reality. By questioning our initial reactions and focusing on the facts, we can respond to challenges with clarity and wisdom. From there, we'll venture into the counterintuitive practice of negative visualization, mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios to build our resilience and appreciate what we have. By facing our fears and cultivating inner strength, we can weather any storm. Of course, not everything is within our control, which brings us to the 4th principle of focusing on what is. The Stoics knew that true freedom comes from taking ownership of our choices and attitudes, not wasting energy on things we can't change. By directing our efforts where they matter most, we can make the best of any situation. But Stoicism isn't just about personal thriving, it's also about living in harmony with the greater whole. That's where the 5th principle comes in, reflecting on the bigger picture and seeing our struggles in the vast context of space and time. By zooming out and connecting to something larger, we find perspective and purpose. The 6th principle takes this idea of connection even further, reminding us to cultivate gratitude for the many blessings and relationships that sustain us. The Stoics knew that focusing on what we appreciate rather than what we lack is the key to contentment and joy. And finally, we'll explore the 7th principle of serving others, the ultimate expression of Stoic wisdom. By orienting our lives around contribution and compassion, we transcend our narrow self-interest and find deep meaning and fulfillment. We recognize that we're all in this together, part of the same human family. As we explore each of these principles, we'll dive into real-world examples, practical exercises, and powerful stories of people who have used Stoic wisdom to overcome great challenges and live with purpose and resilience. Along the way, I'll share some of my own struggles and breakthroughs and invite you to reflect on how these ideas might apply to your own life. Now, a quick disclaimer: this is not about suppressing your emotions or becoming a robot. The Stoics weren't advocating for a life without feeling, but rather a life of conscious engagement, of fully experiencing both the joys and the sorrows, but not being ruled by them. It's about developing the inner resources to meet life's challenges with grace and grit. So whether you're going through a difficult time right now, or simply seeking ancient wisdom for a life well lived, this exploration is for you. Get ready to dive deep into the heart of Stoic philosophy and discover the timeless tools for emotional mastery and resilient living. It's not going to be easy. Growth never is. But I promise you, it will be worth it. You have the power within you to transform your relationship to life's challenges and tap into a source of unshakable strength and freedom. And we're going to do it together, one principle at a time. Are you ready to embrace the wisdom of the Stoics and take charge of your emotional well-being? Then let's begin with the first and most fundamental teaching that underlies all the rest, the reality of impermanence. Get ready to see change in a whole new light. Rule 1. Embracing impermanence. One of the core tenets of Stoicism is the idea that all things are temporary, including relationships, possessions, status, health, and even our own lives. The Stoics saw this not as a reason for despair, but as a path to freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, "Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." Our attachments and struggles often come from holding on to personal perspectives and illusions about permanence that don't reflect reality. On an intellectual level, we all know that change is constant and nothing lasts forever. But really, internalizing this truth is a lifelong practice. Our minds have a hard time accepting impermanence. We cling to the illusion of solidity and control. But when we fight the fleeting nature of life, we suffer. As the Buddha said, attachment is the root of suffering. The solution isn't to avoid attachment, but to accept impermanence even as we open ourselves to connection. I want to share a story about how I learned this lesson the hard way. I had a best friend all through childhood and into our early 20s. We did everything together, from playing pretend for hours as kids to staying up all night talking about our dreams, heartbreaks, and deepest fears as teenagers. We had that rare soul connection where we just got each other on a fundamental level. I thought we'd be friends forever. But as we grew into adulthood, things started to change. Our paths began diverging as we developed different interests, social circles, and life goals. I moved to a new city for grad school, while she dove into an intense career in finance. Our long, rambling phone calls became shorter and less frequent. That unfiltered sharing and laughter took more effort to access. The changes were subtle at first, but I could feel us growing apart. I remember the day it really hit me. I had flown back to my hometown for the holidays, expecting to fall right back into our old groove. But when we met up, it felt different. The conversation was a little stilted, the silences a little awkward. There was a guardedness that had never been there before. I felt like I was grasping for a connection that was no longer solid. In that moment, I had a choice. I could cling to my expectation of how things were supposed to be, the storyline of friendship forever, no matter what. I could take the changes personally and blame myself or my friend. I could try to force a reunion and reignite the spark. Or I could acknowledge the truth, that even the deepest friendships aren't exempt from the forces of change and impermanence. It wasn't easy, but I chose the latter. Over the next weeks and months, I grieved the friendship as I had known it. I let myself feel the sadness, the fear, the discomfort of releasing my grip on someone so precious to me. I journaled about my memories and gratitude for all we had shared, and gradually I started to see our connection in a new light. Yes, we might never again be as close as we once were, but that didn't negate the immense love, laughter and tears we had shared for so many formative years. Our friendship wasn't a failure because it changed. It was a gift precisely because it had been so rich for the time it lasted. We were different people now, and that was okay. Accepting that freed me to appreciate what we still had, instead of pining for what was lost. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Embracing impermanence is hard. It can be seriously uncomfortable and even heartbreaking at times. But in my experience, it's the only way to find real peace and fulfillment. When we cling to the illusion of permanence, we set ourselves up for disappointment. But when we make peace with the fleeting nature of all things, we can find a source of freedom, spontaneity and aliveness that is available to us at all times. So how can we start to embrace impermanence in our daily lives? One powerful practice is to consciously reflect on the temporary nature of things, even and especially the things we cherish most. We can ask ourselves, how would I live if I really grasped that this person or situation might change at any moment? What would I say to my partner, child or friend if I knew our time together was finite? How can I bring my full presence and care to this experience, knowing it won't last forever? I invite you now to try this reflection for yourself. Close your eyes and bring to mind something or someone you're deeply attached to. A relationship, a job, a stage of life, an identity. Really feel into the tenderness and preciousness of this thing. Notice any places you might be clinging to it, staying a certain way forever. Now, imagine opening your hands and holding this thing a little more lightly. What if you could love it fully, pour your whole heart into it, and still make space for the knowledge that it will inevitably shift? What if you could find a source of permanence and security within yourself that allows you to show up to the temporary nature of life with curiosity and heart? Take a few breaths here, allowing this inquiry to settle into your being. Embracing impermanence doesn't mean never feeling fear, grief, or attachment. It means building our capacity to meet these very human experiences with greater wisdom and resilience. It means recognizing that the beauty and meaning of life is intricately woven with change and loss, and it means savoring each moment and love more deeply, not in spite of, but because of its ephemeral nature. As we close out this exploration of impermanence, I want to share one of my favorite quotes from Seneca, another renowned Stoic philosopher. He wrote, "The fragility of life is the reason to love it. You will not love anything quite so much as that which you might lose." Let that sink in for a moment. What if the reality of impermanence could be a gateway to loving with more abandon, to cherishing what we have while we have it, to showing up fully to the fierce and fleeting beauty of being alive? So as you move through your day and week, I invite you to play with this shift in perspective. When you notice yourself clinging to expectations or illusions of permanence, see if you can take a step back and loosen your grip. When you feel fear or resistance to change, remind yourself that it's okay and natural to feel this way, and see if you can tap into a deeper sense of trust in yourself and life's unfolding. Embracing impermanence is a lifelong journey. It takes courage and practice to keep turning toward this fundamental truth of existence. But in my experience, it's a direct path to joy, presence, and ironically, a sense of true stability that is independent of external circumstances. It's the key to building a life and relationships that can bend without breaking. And it all starts with the willingness to acknowledge change as the one constant we can count on. Speaking of change, it's time for us to flow into our next topic. From the vast perspective of impermanence, we now zoom into the personal realm of our emotions and how we can navigate them with greater skill and clarity. Which brings us to Rule 2, mastering emotions through rational thought. Stoicism is often misunderstood as a philosophy of suppressing emotions and being coldly rational. But the Stoics understood that emotions are a natural and vital part of being human. The goal isn't to eradicate them, but to master them so we can respond to life's challenges with wisdom and resilience. The key insight here is that our emotions are often reactions to our interpretations and judgments about events, not the objective facts. Let me break this down with an example. Let's say you text a friend to share some good news, and they take hours to respond with a brief, seemingly indifferent message. How do you feel? If you're like most people, you might experience a wave of emotions like anxiety, insecurity, frustration, or even anger. But what are those emotions actually based on? Probably a series of lightning-fast thoughts and interpretations, like, "They don't care about me. I must have done something wrong. This friendship isn't as solid as I thought." Notice how quickly the mind leaps to conclusions and papering over the absence of information with stories that are often worst-case scenarios. Now, let's rewind and see how this scenario might unfold through the lens of Stoic philosophy. Remember, the Stoic approach is to focus on the facts, on what we can know for sure. So in this case, the only objective facts are that your friend is slower to respond than usual and their message is brief. That's it. Everything else, the reasons for their behavior, what it means for your friendship, how they feel about you, is a subjective add-on, an interpretation masquerading as truth. From this perspective, you might still feel a twinge of disappointment or concern, and that's totally valid. But you would be less likely to get hooked by a storm of reactive emotions because you'd recognize them as being based on limited information and habitual thought patterns rather than indisputable facts. You might be more inclined to get curious, give your friend the benefit of the doubt, or simply accept the momentary discomfort of uncertainty instead of rushing to fill in the blanks. This distinction between facts and interpretations is so simple, yet so transformative. It's the foundation of what Stoics call rational thought, not in the sense of being coldly logical, but in the sense of being grounded in reality rather than distorted by our assumptions and fears. When we develop this habit of stepping back from our initial interpretations and looking for the objective truth, we create space between stimulus and response. We start to break the cycle of emotional reactivity that causes so much suffering and conflict in our relationships and inner lives. But simple doesn't necessarily mean easy, right? Our minds are masterful at spinning stories, and our emotions can feel so real and urgent in the moment. Catching ourselves in the act of interpretation and pausing to question our assumptions is a skill that takes practice. It requires turning our attention inward and getting really honest about how our own thought patterns shape our experiences. In my own life, learning to distinguish facts from interpretations has been a game changer. I used to be an emotional firecracker, quick to anger and always ready to attack or withdraw at the first sign of conflict. I had a tendency to dramatize situations and take everything personally. For example, if a partner was withdrawn or irritable, I'd immediately spiral into panicked thoughts that the relationship was doomed and it was all my fault. I didn't know how to compassionately communicate about my needs or hold space for different perspectives. It took a lot of mindfulness practice and a deep dive into Stoic philosophy to start changing those patterns. I had to get into the habit of pressing pause when I felt that familiar flare of emotional reactivity and asking myself, what do I actually know for sure about this situation? What hard facts am I working with, and what assumptions am I layering on top? Is this pattern of thought familiar? Is there a different way I could choose to see this? The more I practiced this, the more I began to catch my mind in the act of distortion. I'd notice how quickly I'd jump to negative conclusions or predict worst-case scenarios. I started to see how my unexamined beliefs and fears were shaping my experience of reality, and how I had the power to question and reframe them. Gradually, that pause between stimulus and response grew longer. I'd feel the pull of an old reactive pattern, but remember that I had a choice in how I engaged with it. This shift didn't happen overnight, and it's still an ongoing practice. But as I've strengthened my ability to step back from emotional reactions and focus on the facts, my relationships and inner world have transformed. I'm able to stay grounded in the face of conflict and uncertainty, communicate my needs with greater clarity and care, and extend more empathy and patience to others. I waste so much less energy on needless drama and storylines, and I'm able to show up as a calm, clear-headed presence for the people in my life. Of course, this doesn't mean I never get triggered or reactive. It doesn't mean I'm immune to irrational thoughts or tumultuous emotions. No matter how much we practice, we all get hijacked by our habitual patterns sometimes. We're human, and our brains are wired to scan for threats and make snap judgments. The goal isn't perfection, but progress, self-awareness, and self-compassion. So how can we start integrating this wisdom into our daily lives? The simplest way is to develop a habit of pressing pause when you notice a strong emotional reaction arising. In that space of pausing, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what are the facts of this situation? What am I observing directly, without interpretation? What assumptions or beliefs might I be bringing to this moment? Is there another perspective I could try on? It might feel unnatural or even impossible at first to slow down and question your reactions. Your mind will likely come up with all kinds of justifications and reasons to stay stuck in the initial triggered response. That's okay. The point isn't to bypass or invalidate your emotions, but to build your capacity to relate to them with a bit more space and clarity, to recognize them as messengers rather than objective reality. It's also okay to fully feel your emotions even as you question the thoughts behind them. You don't have to choose between feeling and being rational. In fact, allowing yourself to feel your feelings is a key part of processing and releasing them in a healthy way. The trick is not getting so swept up in them that you lose sight of your ability to choose your response. So as you go through your day, notice when you feel emotionally triggered or reactive. Take that momentary pause, that sacred space between stimulus and response. Get curious about the stories your mind is telling and whether they're based on facts or interpretations. Practice the fine art of pressing pause, breathing deep, and choosing how you want to show up in that moment. Remember that no matter how intense your emotions may feel, you always have the power to relate to them with a bit more awareness and skill. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When we develop the ability to question our thoughts and reactions, we tap into an unshakable inner freedom. We're no longer at the mercy of external circumstances or the whims of our emotions. We become the calm eye at the center of the storm, the graceful dancer who can flow with life's changing rhythms. From this place of emotional clarity and inner strength, we turn now to a practice that might seem paradoxical at first glance, deliberately turning toward discomfort to cultivate resilience and appreciation. Get ready to dive into Rule 3, practicing negative visualization. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Why on earth would we want to imagine negative scenarios? Isn't the whole point of personal growth to focus on the positive and manifest our dreams? While I'm all for visioning and affirmative thinking, the Stoics understood that there's immense value in also grappling with life's darker possibilities. They called this practice premeditatio malorum, or premeditation of evils, which sounds intense, I know. But stick with me here. The basic idea is that by mentally rehearsing for misfortune and loss, we build our capacity to face them with resilience and grace. We learn to appreciate what we have while we have it, instead of taking it for granted. And we minimize the sting if and when those losses do occur, because we've already made space for them in our psyche. It's a way of inoculating ourselves against the shocks of fate, of finding an unshakable sense of okayness that isn't dependent on everything going our way. I know this might sound a bit morbid or pessimistic at first. We're so conditioned to avoid discomfort and only focus on what we want to attract into our lives. The idea of deliberately contemplating worst-case scenarios can seem like an invitation to anxiety and dread. But practiced skillfully, with an attitude of curiosity and courage, negative visualization can actually be deeply liberating. It's not about dwelling on doom and gloom or convincing ourselves that the worst will happen. It's about making peace with the reality that loss and change are inevitable parts of life, and that we have the inner resources to meet them with an open heart. It's about expanding our comfort zone and finding a steadiness that allows us to embrace life's full spectrum of experiences. So what does this look like in practice? One way to experiment with negative visualization is to imagine losing or letting go of something that you currently rely on for your happiness and well-being. It could be a relationship, a job, a prized possession, an ability, an identity. The point is to choose something that you tend to take for granted or that you can't imagine living without. Once you've chosen your subject, take a few deep breaths and let yourself visualize a scene in which this loss occurs. Make it as vivid and detailed as possible, using all your senses. Where are you? What are you doing? What thoughts and emotions are coming up for you? How does it feel in your body? Really allow yourself to go there, to feel the raw ache of grief and disorientation. Now, here's the key. As you sit with those difficult sensations and emotions, see if you can find a ground of okayness within yourself, a sense that even in the midst of this loss, you are still whole and capable, that you have an inner strength and wisdom that can carry you through, that your worthiness and lovability are intrinsic, not dependent on external circumstances. See if you can connect to a place of surrender and trust, even in the face of your deepest fears. I want to share a personal story of how negative visualization supported me through one of the toughest periods of my life. A few years ago, my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He was given 6 months to live, and I had to face the devastating reality of losing one of the most important people in my world. I was utterly heartbroken and unmoored. I couldn't imagine how I would navigate life without my dad's steady presence, his goofy jokes, his unconditional love and support. The anticipatory grief was almost unbearable at times, and my mind kept spinning into tragic future scenarios. That's when I remembered the Stoic practice of negative visualization. Instead of resisting those painful visions, I let myself consciously step into them. I journaled about my worst fears and let myself ugly cry as I detailed the scenes of loss. I wrote unsent letters to my dad, pouring out my love and gratitude, saying all the things I wanted him to hear. I also visualized the aftermath, the funeral, the empty chair at family dinners, the milestones and memories he wouldn't be there for. I saw myself drowning in grief, unable to function, alienating friends with my inability to be present. I felt into the ache of a world without my father in it. And then, with shaky courage, I looked for that ground of inner strength within myself. I visualized myself slowly picking up the pieces, leaning on loved ones, creating new rituals to honor his memory. I saw myself courageously feeling my feelings, being patient with my healing process, and gradually stitching my life back together. I reconnected with my own unbreakable spirit, my capacity to carry my father's love forward even in his physical absence. When my dad finally passed, the grief was shattering, just as I had envisioned. But because I had consciously walked through those scenarios, I wasn't totally blindsided. The pain was still immense, but it had a sense of familiarity to it. I knew the contours of this terrain and trusted my resilience to find my way through. Perhaps most importantly, the practice of negative visualization had given me the gift of presence in my father's final months. Because I had made space for my fears and dread, I was able to show up more fully to cherish the time we had left. I said all the things I needed to say and soaked up every last bit of his presence and love. In the midst of deep sadness, there was also a profound sense of gratitude and grace. Now, I want to be clear. Negative visualization isn't a magic bullet that takes away the pain of loss. It's not about numbing ourselves to life's difficulties or forcing ourselves to get over it before we're ready. The Stoics never claimed that we could eliminate suffering, only that we could change our relationship to it. By consciously grappling with the impermanence of things, we start to build that muscle of resilience. We learn to soften into difficulty instead of resisting it. We find an inner core of self-trust that allows us to stay present and open-hearted even in the face of our deepest fears. We remember again and again that we are stronger than we know. So as you move through your day, I invite you to play with this practice in small ways. When you're appreciating a perfect moment with your partner or child, let yourself imagine what it would be like to lose them. When you're feeling on top of the world after a big success, visualize how you would handle a crushing failure. When you're relishing your health and vitality, spend a few moments sitting with the reality of your own mortality. The point isn't to dwell in fear, but to touch the poignant beauty of life's fragility. To remember not to take your blessings for granted. To build your capacity to be present and loving even in the hardest moments, to find that place of surrender and trust that can carry you through anything. As Seneca wrote, "Rehearse death." To say this is to tell a person to rehearse his freedom. A person who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. By facing our fears and finding our ground in the midst of them, we access a profound liberation. We stop living as captives to our attachments and illusions of control. We discover a source of peace and wisdom inside ourselves that nothing can take away. From this place of inner freedom, we now turn our gaze to the eternal Stoic question: what is truly within our control? How can we focus our energy to lead an intentional and empowered life, instead of getting tossed around by the fickle tides of externals? This brings us to Rule 4. Focus on what you can control. Of all the Stoic teachings, this one is perhaps the most well-known and universally resonant. The idea that we should direct our attention and effort to the things within our power and make peace with what lies outside our sphere of influence is a simple yet endlessly profound principle. It's the key to emotional equanimity, effective action, and true inner freedom. The Stoics understood that so much of our suffering comes from trying to control things that are fundamentally beyond our control. We get attached to specific outcomes, we rail against the hand we've been dealt, we waste our energy on blaming and complaining about external circumstances. All the while, we neglect the one realm where we have real agency, our own judgment, attitudes and choices in each moment. Epictetus, one of the most famous Stoic philosophers, put it this way: the chief task in life is simply this: to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Where then do I look for good and evil? Not to uncontrollable externals, but within myself to the choices that are my own. When we truly take this teaching to heart, it's like a radical reorientation of our lives. We stop fighting reality and start focusing on what we can do with the hand we've been dealt. We stop wasting our precious energy on things we can't change and start investing it where it truly matters. We learn to find our power and peace within instead of constantly looking outside ourselves for validation, satisfaction, or security. I'll give you an example of how this shift played out in my own life. A few years ago, I was in a job that I absolutely hated. The work was soul-sucking, the culture was toxic, and I dreaded waking up every morning. I spent so much time complaining about my horrible boss, the unreasonable deadlines, the politics and bureaucracy. I felt like a victim of my circumstances, powerless to change my situation. The turning point came when I started studying Stoic philosophy and really grappling with this idea of focusing on what I could control. I realized that while I couldn't single-handedly change the dysfunctional system I was in, I could change how I related to it. I could choose my attitude, my work ethic, my self-care routines. I could choose to find meaning and growth opportunities even in the challenging environment. I remember one day, after a particularly demoralizing meeting, closing my office door and asking myself, what's in my control here? I couldn't control my boss's behavior or the crazy expectations placed on me. But I could control my own response. I could choose to stay centered in my integrity, to be kind to my colleagues, to do my best work with the resources I had. I could choose to spend my lunch break walking in nature instead of stewing at my desk. I could update my resume, reach out to contacts, and lay the groundwork to find a better job. As I started to shift my focus to my own sphere of influence, something amazing happened. I started to feel more empowered and at peace, even though my external circumstances hadn't changed. I was able to show up to work with more clarity and less resentment. Ironically, my performance and relationships actually started to improve because I wasn't wasting so much energy on complaining and feeling like a victim. And when an incredible new job opportunity did come along, I was in a much better headspace to recognize and seize it. Now, this kind of radical responsibility isn't always easy. Our minds are so accustomed to fixating on all the things we can't control, other people's choices, societal injustices, the randomness of fate. And to be clear, focusing on our own sphere of influence doesn't mean we ignore or accept what's wrong in the world. Stoicism is not a philosophy of passive resignation, but of active virtuousness. The point is to recognize the difference between the things we can directly impact and the things we can't, and to channel our energy accordingly. When we're faced with difficult circumstances, we can ask ourselves, what aspects of this situation are within my control? What choices can I make that align with my values and goals? How can I show up with courage, compassion, and wisdom, even in the face of adversity? This discernment between what is and isn't in our power is an ongoing practice. It requires a kind of radical honesty and self-awareness. We have to be willing to look at where we're giving away our power, where we're playing the victim or the martyr. We have to be willing to take full responsibility for our judgments, attitudes, and behaviors, even when it's uncomfortable or humbling. But as we develop this skill of focusing on our own chooser, something incredible happens. We start to tap into a deep sense of inner autonomy and self-mastery. We stop being so reactive to external circumstances and learn to find our center in the midst of chaos. We discover that we're far more resilient and capable than we ever imagined. So as you go through your day to day, I invite you to notice where your attention and energy are going. When you find yourself getting hooked by something outside your control, whether it's a frustrating colleague, a delayed flight, or a global pandemic, see if you can gently bring your focus back to your own domain. Ask yourself, What is within my power in this moment? What choice can I make that reflects my highest values and aspirations? Remember, you always have a choice. Even in the direst situations, you have the power to choose your perspective, your attitude, your actions. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you handle it. You can choose to show up with presence, integrity, and an open heart. You can choose to be a force for good in whatever way is available to you. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. When we focus on what we can control, we tap into an inexhaustible source of inner freedom and power. We become the authors of our own story, the captains of our soul. We learn to ride the waves of change with grace and resilience, trusting in our ability to navigate whatever comes our way. From this place of grounded self-leadership, we widen our gaze to consider one of the most transformative Stoic practices, zooming out and seeing our struggles in the context of the bigger picture. This brings us to our final rule for today. Rule 5. Reflect on the bigger picture. Perspective. It's one of the most powerful tools we have for finding peace, meaning, and resilience in the face of life's challenges. When we're caught in the heat of difficult emotions or circumstances, it's so easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. Our problems can feel overwhelming, our pain too acute to bear. We can get tunnel vision, convinced that this moment will last forever. But the Stoics understood that our individual lives are but a tiny blip in the vast expanse of space and time. They practiced zooming out and remembering the impermanence and interconnectedness of all things. They found solace in the realization that their struggles were a natural part of the great unfolding of the cosmos. Now, this might sound a bit abstract or lofty at first. What does contemplating the universe have to do with dealing with a breakup or a job loss or a health crisis? But hear me out. There's something profoundly comforting and humbling about situating our lives in a larger context. It doesn't erase our problems, but it can give us a different perspective on them. When we remember that everything is temporary and that we're part of an intricate web of cause and effect, we start to hold our struggles a bit more lightly. We can find a sense of okayness knowing that ups and downs are a normal part of every human life. We can draw on the strength and resilience of our ancestors who faced their own adversities. We can be inspired by the countless people across history and around the world who have found meaning and joy despite hardship. Reflecting on the bigger picture is also a powerful antidote to self-absorption. When we're caught up in our own drama, it's easy to forget that everyone around us is fighting their own battles. We can get so focused on our personal happiness and success that we lose sight of our connection to others and our place in the greater scheme of things. But when we zoom out, we remember that we're part of something much larger than ourselves. We see that our actions and choices have ripple effects on the people and world around us. We feel called to rise above our narrow self-interest and consider how we might contribute to the greater good. We find a sense of purpose and meaning that transcends our fleeting desires and fears. In my own life, reflecting on the bigger picture has been a lifeline during some of my darkest moments. I remember one period when I was going through a particularly painful breakup, at the same time that I was dealing with some health issues and career setbacks. I felt like my world was caving in, like I would never feel happy or whole again. One evening, in the midst of my despair, I went for a walk in the hills near my house. As I climbed higher, I watched the sun slowly sinking into the horizon, painting the sky in vivid streaks of orange and pink. I reached the top of the ridge and looked out over the vast expanse of the city below, the twinkling lights stretching out to the sea. Suddenly I felt very small in the best possible way. My problems, which had seemed so all-consuming moments before, felt like a tiny flicker in the grand sweep of time and space. I thought about all the generations of people who had walked this same earth, gazing at the same sun and stars, grappling with their own versions of love and loss. I felt connected to something ancient and enduring, a cosmic web of beauty and resilience. In that moment, I found a sense of perspective and peace that had eluded me for weeks. It wasn't that my problems magically disappeared, but they seemed more bearable in the context of the bigger picture. I felt a renewed sense of trust in my own resilience and in the basic okayness of life, even in the midst of change and difficulty. Now, I'm not saying that a pretty sunset can solve all your problems, if only it were that easy. But actively cultivating a wider perspective can be a powerful tool for emotional regulation and meaning-making. It doesn't have to be a grand epiphany on a mountaintop. There are many simple ways to practice zooming out in our daily lives. One technique is to imagine yourself looking back on this moment from some point in the future, a year from now, 5 years from now, even the end of your life. How do you think you'll view this current struggle in the rearview mirror? What lessons or growth might come from it? What would you want to remember about how you showed up for it? Another practice is to spend time in nature, contemplating the cycles of growth and decay, the intricate ecosystems that have existed long before us and will continue long after we're gone, or to study history, marveling at the sweep of human civilization and the countless stories of triumph and tragedy that have shaped our world, or to gaze at the night sky, pondering the unfathomable vastness of the universe and our tiny place within it. The point is to intentionally shift our perspective, to remember that our individual lives are part of a much larger tapestry. This doesn't mean that our experiences and emotions aren't real or valid. They absolutely are. But it can help us hold them with a bit more lightness and grace, knowing that everything is temporary and that we're all in this together. Reflecting on the bigger picture also has a way of clarifying what really matters. When we zoom out, we start to see that so many of the things we stress about are actually pretty trivial in the grand scheme of things. We remember what truly brings us joy and meaning, our relationships, our growth, our contributions to the world. We feel inspired to live with more intentionality and integrity, to make choices that align with our deepest values. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When we cultivate a wider perspective, we tap into a source of inner strength and wisdom that can carry us through life's ups and downs. We remember that we're part of something much greater than ourselves, and that our struggles and joys are all part of the rich tapestry of the human experience. So, as we close out our exploration of Stoic principles for emotional resilience, I invite you to make reflecting on the bigger picture a regular practice. The next time you find yourself getting caught up in personal drama or struggle, see if you can take a step back and situate it in a larger context. Ask yourself, in the grand scheme of things, how important will this problem feel a year from now? What might I learn, or how might I grow from this challenge? How can I use this experience as an opportunity to live with more wisdom, courage, and compassion? How can I remember my connection to others and find ways to contribute to the greater good? Remember, zooming out isn't about invalidating your experiences or bypassing your emotions. It's about expanding your perspective and finding a sense of groundedness in the midst of change and difficulty. It's about recognizing that your life is part of a rich, complex, ever-unfolding story, and that you have the power to shape that story through your choices and actions. So, as you go out into your day, see if you can carry this broader view with you. When you find yourself getting hooked by stress or worry, take a deep breath and remind yourself of the bigger picture. When you're faced with a tough decision or challenge, ask yourself what really matters in the long run. When you have a moment of joy or connection, savor it as a precious gift in the fleeting beauty of life. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. For thousands of years, people just like you have grappled with the same existential questions and challenges. They've found solace in the wisdom of the Stoics and other timeless philosophies. They've leaned on each other for support and guidance, and they've risen to meet adversity with courage and resilience. As Epictetus said, "We are not privy to the stories behind people's actions, so we should be patient with others and suspend judgment of them, recognizing the limits of our understanding." When we reflect on the bigger picture, we cultivate a sense of humility and compassion for ourselves and others. We remember that we're all doing the best we can with the hand we've been dealt, and that there's so much more to every person's story than meets the eye. So let us go forward with an expansive view and an open heart. Let us face life's joys and sorrows with equanimity, knowing that everything is temporary and that we have the inner resources to meet whatever comes our way. Let us remember our place in the great web of existence and live in a way that honors our interconnectedness. And let us support each other with kindness and understanding, recognizing that we're all in this together, navigating the beautiful, messy, ever-changing adventure of being human. Rule 6. Cultivate gratitude. In the midst of life's struggles and uncertainties, it's easy to lose sight of all the good that surrounds us. We can get so focused on what's lacking or not going our way that we fail to appreciate the abundance and beauty that's right in front of us. But the Stoics understood that cultivating a practice of gratitude is one of the most powerful ways to find joy, meaning, and resilience in any circumstances. Epictetus wrote, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." This simple shift in perspective, from fixating on what we don't have to appreciating what we do, can transform our entire experience of life. It doesn't mean denying our pain or challenges, but rather consciously choosing to also focus on the good that coexists alongside them. Gratitude is a way of training our attention to the blessings that are always present, even in the darkest of times. It's a reminder that life is fundamentally good, even when it's hard, and it's a powerful antidote to the hedonic treadmill of always wanting more, better, different than what we have. So what does a gratitude practice actually look like? It can be as simple as taking a few moments each day to mentally list the things you're thankful for. You might reflect on the people who love and support you, the skills and strengths you possess, the basic necessities that you often take for granted, like food, shelter, and clean water. You can appreciate the beauty of nature, the kindness of strangers, the simple pleasures that make life worth living. One powerful way to cultivate gratitude is to keep a gratitude journal. Each night before bed, write down 3 to 5 things you're grateful for from your day. They can be big or small, profound or mundane. The point is to actively seek out and savor the good moments, to intentionally dwell on what's working rather than what's lacking. Another practice is to express your gratitude directly to others. When was the last time you told a loved one how much you appreciate them? Have you thanked a coworker for their help on a project, or a barista for making your morning coffee with care? Sharing our appreciation not only uplifts others, but it also reinforces our own sense of connection and abundance. Now, cultivating gratitude doesn't mean sugarcoating reality or denying our struggles. It's not about forcing positive thinking or numbing ourselves to life's pain. Rather, it's about expanding our perspective to include both the light and the dark, the blessings and the challenges. It's about recognizing that even in our darkest moments, there are still glimmers of grace and goodness to be found. Viktor Frankl, the renowned psychologist and Holocaust survivor, wrote in his book Man's Search for Meaning, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Even in the unimaginable horrors of the concentration camps, Frankl found small moments of beauty and connection to be grateful for: a sunset, a shared crust of bread, a fleeting exchange of kindness. And it was this capacity for gratitude that helped him find meaning and resilience in the face of unthinkable suffering. Gratitude is a choice we can make in any moment, no matter our external circumstances. It's a way of reclaiming our inner freedom and agency, of affirming that life is still worth living even when it's hard. And it's a powerful reminder of our fundamental interconnectedness, of the web of gifts and blessings that sustain us each day. So as you go through your day today, I invite you to look for opportunities to cultivate gratitude. Start your morning by mentally listing a few things you're thankful for, or write them down in a journal. Take a moment to savor your food, to appreciate the people around you, to marvel at the beauty of the natural world. When you find yourself fixating on lack or struggle, see if you can consciously shift your attention to what's good and working in your life. Remember, gratitude isn't about glossing over life's difficulties or pretending to be happy all the time. It's about expanding your perspective to include the full spectrum of human experience, the bitter and the sweet. It's about training your mind to seek out beauty and meaning, even in the midst of adversity. And it's about recognizing that each moment of life is an incredible gift, an opportunity to love and learn and grow. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." Let us greet each day with this sense of wonder and appreciation, even as we navigate life's ups and downs. Let us cultivate gratitude as a way of affirming our unshakable okayness, our inherent dignity and worth as human beings. And let us use our blessings as fuel for making a positive difference in the world, which brings us to our final Stoic principle. Rule 7. Serve others. At the heart of Stoic philosophy is the idea that we are all part of a greater whole, inextricably connected to each other and to the cosmos itself. The Stoics believed that our highest purpose in life is to serve this whole, to use our unique gifts and talents for the greater good of humanity. They saw that true fulfillment comes not from chasing personal pleasure or gain, but from contributing to something larger than ourselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What is not good for the beehive cannot be good for the bees." In other words, what hurts the community hurts the individual, and what serves the community serves the individual. We are all in this together, and our fates are intertwined. This philosophy flies in the face of the hyper-individualism of modern culture, which tells us that our worth is based on our personal achievements and that looking out for ourselves is the path to happiness. But the Stoics understood that this kind of self-absorption is ultimately unfulfilling and disconnecting. It cuts us off from our innate human need for meaning, purpose, and belonging. When we shift our focus from serving ourselves to serving others, something profound happens. We get out of our own heads and connect with something greater. We tap into the joy and fulfillment that comes from making a positive difference in the world, however small. We remember that we matter, that our choices and actions have ripple effects far beyond what we can see. So what does a life of service actually look like? It doesn't necessarily mean quitting your job and joining the Peace Corps, though it could. Rather, it's about orienting your life around being of benefit, in whatever way feels authentic and meaningful to you. It could mean volunteering for a cause you care about, or simply being a more present and supportive friend. It could mean using your skills to help a coworker with a project, or creating art that inspires others. It could mean raising conscious children, or planting a garden, or advocating for social justice. The possibilities are endless, and there's no one right way to serve. What matters is the intention and the orientation. When we approach life with the question of how can I help, rather than what's in it for me, everything shifts. We start to see opportunities for kindness and contribution all around us. We tap into a deeper sense of meaning and purpose that fulfills us in a way that chasing personal pleasure never could. Now, this doesn't mean that we completely neglect our own needs or become martyrs for others. The Stoics believed in the importance of self-care and attending to our own well-being so that we can be of greater service. As Seneca wrote, "No one can lead a happy life or even a supportable life without the study of wisdom." Taking care of ourselves is part of the larger project of taking care of the whole. But when we make service a central part of our lives, we naturally start to loosen our grip on our own ego desires. We find freedom from the tyranny of self-absorption and tap into a larger sense of interconnectedness. We discover that our happiness is not something we can pursue directly, but rather a byproduct of living with meaning and purpose. And paradoxically, when we focus on serving others, we often find that our own needs are met in unexpected ways. We attract supportive people and opportunities into our lives. We build genuine self-esteem based on our contributions rather than our achievements. We find joy and fulfillment in the simple act of being kind and making a difference. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? This question cuts to the heart of what it means to be human, to be part of something larger than ourselves. It reminds us that we all have gifts to share and a role to play in the great unfolding of life. So as you go through your day today, I invite you to reflect on how you might orient your life a little more towards service. What are the causes or communities that call to your heart? What are the unique strengths and passions you have to offer the world? How can you use your privilege or position to uplift others and make a positive impact? Remember, service doesn't have to be grandiose or self-sacrificing. It can be as simple as offering a smile or a kind word, standing up for someone who's being mistreated, or sharing your resources with those in need. The point is to start seeing your life as a gift to be shared, rather than a prize to be hoarded. And as you cultivate this orientation of service, notice how it shifts your relationship to your own struggles and desires. When we're focused on others, our own problems often seem smaller and more manageable. We tap into a sense of meaning and purpose that carries us through even the toughest times. We remember that we're part of something greater and that our choices and actions matter. Ultimately, a life of service is a life of freedom. Freedom from the narrow confines of self-interest, freedom to tap into our deepest humanity and potential. It's a recognition that we're all in this together, and that our liberation is bound up with the liberation of all beings. As Dr. King said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So let us move through our days with this awareness of our interconnectedness, this call to be of service in whatever ways we can. Let us use our gifts and passions to make a positive difference, to alleviate suffering and spread more light in the world. And let us remember that in serving others, we serve ourselves and the highest in us all. We've explored a lot of rich territory today, diving into 7 key Stoic principles for cultivating emotional resilience and inner freedom. Let's take a moment to recap and weave together these powerful teachings. We began with the foundational insight of impermanence, remembering that all things are in constant flux and that grasping at permanence is a surefire path to suffering. By cultivating a more open and accepting relationship to change, we find a deeper sense of okayness and ease in the midst of life's ups and downs. From this ground of acceptance, we explored the power of mastering our emotions through rational thought. By learning to question our initial interpretations and focus on the facts, we create space between stimulus and response, freeing ourselves from the tyranny of reactivity. We tap into our capacity for clear-headed wisdom, even in triggering situations. To build our resilience and appreciation in the face of change and loss, we practiced negative visualization, consciously grappling with life's inevitable difficulties. By mentally rehearsing the worst and finding our inner strength and resources, we inoculate ourselves against the shocks of fate and discover a deeper gratitude for the preciousness of each moment. Turning to what we can actually control in this great unfolding of life, we focused our efforts on our own attitudes, judgments, and actions. Instead of being blown about by every wind of external circumstance, we planted ourselves in the firm ground of our inner sovereignty, reclaiming our power to choose our response in each moment. Widening our perspective from the narrow concerns of ego, we reflected on the bigger picture, remembering that all our struggles and joys are part of the vast tapestry of human history and cosmic unfolding. By situating our lives in this larger context, we find a sense of meaning and connection that carries us through the darkest of times. Practicing gratitude, we intentionally tuned our attention to the abundant blessings in our lives, from the simplest pleasures to the most profound gifts. We saw how focusing on what we appreciate uplifts our spirits and connects us to what matters most, without bypassing or sugarcoating the hard parts of life. And finally, we explored the deep fulfillment that comes from orienting our lives towards service and contribution. By getting out of our own heads and offering our gifts for the greater good, we taste the joy and meaning of being part of something larger than our small selves. We discover that in serving others, we also serve the highest in ourselves. My friends, these teachings are not abstract philosophical ideas, but living wisdom for our times. In a world that often feels uncertain and overwhelming, they offer us a path to inner freedom and resilience, to showing up with presence and purpose amidst the chaos. They reconnect us to our deepest humanity and to the preciousness of this fleeting gift of life. But as with any wisdom teaching, the real power comes in the practice and embodiment. These principles only come alive when we integrate them into our daily lives, when we make them our own through trial and error, reflection and refinement. There is no finish line to cross, no perfection to attain, only the ongoing invitation to live with a little more awareness, courage, and compassion each day. So as we close our time together, I invite you to reflect on which of these principles resonates most deeply with you right now. What is the one teaching or practice you want to focus on in the coming days and weeks? How can you break it down into small, actionable steps that you can weave into the fabric of your daily routines? Perhaps it's taking a few mindful breaths before reacting to a challenging situation, or writing in a gratitude journal each night before bed. Maybe it's reaching out to a friend in need, or consciously questioning a limiting belief that's been holding you back. It doesn't have to be grand or heroic. The most transformative changes often start with the humblest of intentions. As you experiment with these teachings, remember to bring a spirit of curiosity and self-compassion to the process. There will be moments of forgetting, backsliding, falling short of your ideals. This is not failure, but the natural rhythm of growth and learning. The point is not to be perfect, but to keep showing up again and again with an open heart and a willingness to begin anew. And remember that you are not alone on this path. For centuries, seekers of wisdom have been grappling with the great questions of life, turning to the Stoics and other venerable traditions for guidance and inspiration. Even now, there are countless others walking beside you, stumbling and rising again, doing their best to live with authenticity and meaning in a challenging world. So take heart, my friends. You have everything you need within you to meet life's joys and sorrows with grace and resilience. You are part of a great lineage of wisdom and compassion, stretching back through the ages and into the very heart of the cosmos. And you have the power, in each moment, to choose a life of purpose and service, of love and liberation. As we part ways for now, I want to leave you with one final beloved quote from Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic emperor and seeker of wisdom. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." May you trust in that strength, that unshakable okayness at the core of your being. May you weather life's storms with grace and resilience, tending to the gardens of your inner life and the world around you. And may you remember always the profound gift and responsibility of this one wild and precious life. From my heart to yours, I thank you for walking this path of wisdom with me today. May you be well, may you be at peace, may you be a force for good in this world, and may you always hold fast to the light of your highest self, shining bright amidst the darkness. Until we meet again, my friends, with love and gratitude,